Have you ever been ignored, not for hours, not for days, but for weeks, maybe even months?
No explanation, no closure.
Just silence. And then suddenly they come back. They stand in front of you like nothing ever happened. And in that moment, your heart is racing, your mind is confused, and your emotions are all over the place. But here's the truth. Most people never realize this moment isn't about them. It's about you. It's about who you've become in their absence and what you're willing to tolerate now. Because when an avoidant finally comes back, it's not just a reunion, it's a test. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forces in human connection. Most people think communication is about words, what someone says, how they say it, the promises they make. But the truth is, silence often speaks louder than any sentence ever could. When someone disappears, when they withdraw, when they stop showing up, what they're giving you is unfiltered truth. No performance, no excuses, no carefully crafted explanations. Just raw, undeniable reality. Think about it. When someone values you, they find a way to stay present. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but consistently. They communicate even when it's uncomfortable. They show up even when life gets busy. So when that presence suddenly turns into absence, when consistency turns into silence, that shift is not random. It's a message. And most people ignore it because it's not the message they want to hear. Instead, they start filling in the blanks. Maybe they're busy. Maybe something happened. Maybe I did something wrong. And while empathy is powerful, there's a fine line between understanding someone and making excuses for their behavior. Silence doesn't need interpretation, it reveals priorities. Because people always make time for what truly matters to them. Always. Now this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because accepting that truth means letting go of illusions. It means realizing that the connection you felt might not have been equally valued. It means facing the possibility that you were investing emotionally in someone who wasn't capable or willing to meet you at that level. And that realization can hurt. But pain, when faced honestly, becomes clarity.
And clarity is power.
Silence also exposes patterns. It shows you not just what someone does once, but what they default to under pressure. Do they communicate or do they disappear? Do they lean in or do they pull away? These patterns are not accidents, they're reflections of how a person is wired emotionally. And if you ignore these patterns early on, you end up paying a much higher price later. But here's the deeper layer most people miss. Silence doesn't just reveal them, it reveals you. It reveals your tolerance, your boundaries, your self-worth. Because in that silence, you have a choice. You can chase, overanalyze, and seek validation, or you can step back and observe. You can ask yourself, what am I willing to accept in my life? That question changes everything. When you stop reacting emotionally and start observing behavior, you shift from being powerless to being in control. You begin to see that silence is not rejection, it's redirection. It's life showing you what doesn't align with your standards, your needs, your future. And instead of fighting that truth, you can use it. The strongest people are not the ones who demand answers from those who go silent. They are the ones who understand that they don't need those answers. Because the behavior itself is the answer. If someone can go days, weeks, or months without acknowledging your presence, that tells you everything about their level of emotional investment. No explanation can override that. And here's where your power really begins. When you stop taking silence personally, because it's easy to think, what's wrong with me? But the better question is, what does this reveal about them? People act based on their own fears, limitations, and emotional capacity. Their silence is not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their ability to handle connection. Once you internalize that, something shifts inside you. You stop chasing clarity from others and start creating it within yourself. You stop waiting for someone to explain their absence and start deciding what their absence means for your life. And that decision is where your growth lives. Silence is not empty. It's full of truth, full of signals, full of direction. And if you're willing to listen not with your emotions, but with your awareness set, will guide you towards stronger boundaries, higher standards, and deeper self-respect. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to decode someone else's behavior. The goal is to understand what you deserve and refuse to settle for anything less. And when you reach that point, silence no longer confuses you. It clarifies you. Avoidance can look like confidence on the surface. It can look like someone who is unbothered, independent, hard to read, even powerful. They don't chase, they don't explain, they don't seem affected. And for many people, that creates a kind of attraction because mystery can feel like strength. But when you look deeper, when you strip away the surface, avoidance is not strength at all. It's fear wearing a mask. At its core, avoidance is a defense mechanism. It's what happens when someone has learned consciously or unconsciously that closeness leads to discomfort, vulnerability leads to pain, and emotional exposure leads to risk. So instead of leaning into connection, they pull away from it. Not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much and don't know how to handle it. That's the part most people misunderstand. Avoidant individuals are not empty, they are overwhelmed. Think about what it takes to be truly present with another human being. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. It requires the ability to sit in uncomfortable conversations and not run from them. That takes emotional strength. So when someone disappears instead of communicating, when they withdraw instead of engaging, that's not power, it's the absence of that strength. But here's where people get trapped. They interpret avoidance as something they need to fix. They think, if I just say the right thing, if I just show enough patience, if I just love them harder, they'll open up. And while compassion is important, trying to rescue someone from their own emotional patterns is a losing game. Because change doesn't come from external pressure, it comes from internal decision. And if someone hasn't made that decision for themselves, no amount of effort from you will force it. Understanding avoidance as fear shifts your entire perspective. It takes you out of the role of the pursuer and places you in the role of the observer. Instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? You start asking, what are they afraid of? And the answers are often rooted in deep emotional patterns, fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of not being enough, or even fear of being truly seen. Now, recognizing this doesn't mean you excuse the behavior. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. Empathy without boundaries leads to self-abandonment. Yes, you can understand that someone is acting from fear, but you also have to recognize that their fear is not your responsibility to carry. You are not here to shrink your needs to accommodate someone else's limitations. And this is where your power comes back. Because once you see avoidance clearly, you stop taking it personally. You stop internalizing their distance as a reflection of your worth. You stop chasing validation from someone who isn't capable of giving it consistently. And instead, you start making decisions based on alignment, not emotion. Avoidant behavior also thrives on inconsistency. There are moments when they come close, when they show interest, when they make you feel seen. And then just as quickly, they pull away again. That push and pull dynamic creates confusion, and confusion creates attachment. You start holding on to the highs and trying to make sense of the lows. But when you understand that this pattern is driven by fear, not intention, you stop romanticizing it. You begin to see that real strength is not in someone who comes and goes, it's in someone who stays, who communicates, who faces discomfort instead of running from it. Real strength is consistency. It's emotional availability. It's the ability to show up fully even when it's hard. And here's the truth you need to anchor into. You cannot build something stable with someone who avoids stability. You cannot create depth with someone who fears depth. And you cannot expect clarity from someone who lives in avoidance. The more you try, the more you lose yourself in the process. So the shift is not about changing them, it's about changing your standards. It's about deciding that you no longer equate distance with value or mystery with depth. It's about recognizing that someone's inability to meet you emotionally is not a challenge to overcome, but a reality to accept. When you truly understand that avoidance is fear, something powerful happens. You stop chasing, you stop convincing, you stop overextending. and instead you stand firm in what you deserve. You allow people to meet you where you are, or you allow them to fall away. Because at the end of the day, love, connection, and respect are not built on avoidance. They are built on presence. And anything less than that is not something you need to fight for, it's something you need to walk away from. When someone disappears from your life, it feels like something has been taken from you. There's a sense of loss, confusion, and sometimes even rejection that lingers in your mind. You replay conversations, you question your actions, and you wonder what you could have done differently. But what most people fail to see in that moment is that absence is not just an ending, it's also an opening. It creates space. And in that space, something powerful begins to happen within you. Growth rarely happens when everything feels comfortable. It doesn't happen when someone is constantly validating you, reassuring you, or filling every emotional gap. Real growth happens in the silence, in the uncertainty, in those moments when you are left alone with your thoughts and your emotions. Because that's when you are forced to confront yourself. Not the version of you that exists in a relationship, but the version of you that exists on your own. At first, this can feel overwhelming. You may feel incomplete, like a part of your identity is missing. That's because often we unconsciously tie our sense of self to the people we are connected to. Their attention becomes our validation. Their presence becomes our comfort. So when they leave, it feels like we've lost something essential. But in reality, what you're being given is an opportunity to rediscover that everything you were seeking from them can actually be built within you. During that period of absence, you begin to rebuild. Slowly, sometimes painfully, but steadily. You learn how to sit with your emotions instead of avoiding them. You learn how to validate yourself instead of constantly looking for external reassurance. You begin to understand your own needs, your own boundaries, your own values on a deeper level than before. And this process transforms you. You become stronger, not because life got easier, but because you adapted. You start realizing that you don't need someone else to feel whole. You start recognizing patterns you may have ignored before, ways in which you may have overextended, compromised, or settled for less than you deserved. And with that awareness comes a new level of clarity. This is the version of you that matters, not the version that was waiting, hoping, or chasing, but the version that was built in the silence. The version that learned how to stand alone, because when you can stand alone, you stop tolerating anything that makes you feel less than whole. Now here's where the real test comes in. When that person finally returns, when they step back into your life after that long silence, it's not just a moment of reconnection, it's a moment of decision. And the decision is not about them. It's about you. It's about whether you respond from your old self or your new self. Your old self might feel the pull to go back to what was familiar, to ignore the absence, to accept them without question, to fall back into the same dynamic. But your new self sees things differently. Your new self remembers what it took to rebuild. It remembers the nights of confusion, the moments of self-doubt, the effort it took to regain your sense of stability. Growth changes your standards. It changes what you are willing to accept and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. And that's why this moment is so important. Because if you abandon your growth just to recreate the past, you lose everything you gained in their absence. But if you honor that growth, if you stand in it, if you let it guide your response, then something powerful happens. You stop reacting emotionally and you start responding intentionally. You ask yourself, does this person align with who I've become? Not who you used to be, not who you hoped they would be, but who you are now. And sometimes the answer is no. Not because they are a bad person, but because your growth has taken you to a place where their behavior no longer fits. And that's okay. Growth is not about holding on, it's about evolving. It's about choosing what supports your peace, your stability, and your future. The time they were gone was not empty. It was not meaningless. It was a period of transformation that prepared you for this exact moment. A moment where you are no longer dependent on someone else's presence to feel secure. A moment where you can choose from a place of strength instead of need. And that is your power. Not in getting them back, not in proving something to them, but in knowing that you are already whole, in knowing that your value does not increase or decrease based on whether someone chooses to stay or leave. Because the truth is, the right people will not require you to shrink, chase, or question your worth. They will meet you where you stand. And if someone cannot meet you there, then your growth has already given you the answer. So when they return, don't forget who you became in their absence. That version of you is not temporary, it's your foundation now. And whatever decision you make next should come from that place of strength, clarity, and self-respect. Every interaction you have with another person is shaping a pattern, whether you realize it or not. People don't just randomly decide how to treat you, they learn it through what you allow, what you accept, and what you reinforce. This isn't about blaming yourself for someone else's behavior. It's about recognizing the quiet influence you have over the standards that define your relationships. When someone disappears and then returns, the moment they step back into your life becomes a defining point. Not because of what they say, not because of what they promise, but because of how you respond. Your response teaches them what is acceptable moving forward. If you welcome them back without addressing the absence, without acknowledging the impact of their silence, you are missing out on a chance to connect and build a relationship. What you're communicating without saying a word is that their behavior had no real consequence. And people repeat what works. This is where many people lose themselves. They feel relief that the person has returned, and that relief overrides their standards. They prioritize the connection over their self-respect. They think, at least they came back, instead of asking, do they deserve access to me again? And in doing that, they unknowingly lower the bar for how they are treated. But here's the truth. Respect is not something you demand, it's something you establish. And you establish it through consistency in your actions. If your boundaries change based on your emotions, then those boundaries don't exist. They become negotiable. And when something is negotiable, it gets tested. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you become cold or distant. It means you become clear. Clear about what you will tolerate and what you won't. Clear about what you need in order to feel respected, valued, and secure. And most importantly, clear enough to walk away if those needs are not met. When an avoidant person comes back after a long silence, they are often testing the waters, whether consciously or not. They want to see if they can re-enter your life without having to face the discomfort of accountability. They want to know if things can go back to the way they were without change. And your response gives them that answer. If you ignore the silence, if you brush it aside, if you pretend it didn't affect you, you're telling them that disappearing is something you're willing to tolerate. And even if you don't say it out loud, your actions communicate it clearly. On the other hand, if you address it calmly, if you express your standards without anger, but with firmness, you shift the dynamic. You show them that access to you is not automatic, it's earned and maintained through consistency. Now, this doesn't guarantee that they will rise to meet your standards. Some people won't. Some people will choose to leave again because meeting those expectations requires a level of emotional effort they're not willing to give. And that's where your strength is tested. Because it's easy to set boundaries when someone agrees with them. It's much harder to maintain them when someone walks away because of them. But that's the cost of self-respect. It's not always comfortable. It doesn't always lead to immediate rewards. But it creates something far more valuable alignment. It ensures that the people who remain in your life are there because they meet your standards, not because you lowered them. You have to understand that your time, your energy, and your emotional availability are valuable resources. Not everyone deserves access to them. And when you give that access freely to someone who has already shown inconsistency, you're not just risking disappointment, you're reinforcing a cycle. Breaking that cycle requires awareness and courage. Awareness to recognize the patterns and courage to respond differently than you did before. It requires you to choose long-term respect over short-term comfort. It requires you to be okay with the possibility that standing firm might push someone away. But here's the shift. When someone leaves because you have standards, they are not rejecting you, they are revealing their inability to meet you where you stand. And that clarity is a gift. It saves you from investing further in something that lacks stability. You teach people how to treat you not through what you say, but through what you allow, through the standards you uphold, even when it's difficult, through the boundaries you maintain, even when you care, and through the decisions you make, especially in moments when your emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. So when they come back, remember, it's not about proving anything to them. It's about honoring what you've learned, what you've built, and what you now require. It's about standing in your value without needing their validation. Because the moment you truly understand your worth, you stop negotiating it. And when you stop negotiating it, everything changes. Most people believe closure is something that comes from another person. They wait for the explanation, the apology, the honest conversation that will finally make everything make sense. They tell themselves, if I could just understand why they left, if I could just hear them say they're sorry, then I could move on. But the reality is, that moment rarely comes the way you imagine it. And even when it does, it often doesn't give you the peace you were expecting. Because closure is not something someone else gives you. It's something you decide. When someone disappears, especially without explanation, it creates an open loop in your mind. You replay memories, analyze conversations, and search for meaning in every detail. Your mind wants resolution. It wants a clear ending to a confusing story. And in the absence of answers, it keeps going back over and over again, trying to create clarity out of uncertainty. This is where people get stuck. They tie their ability to move forward to someone else's willingness to explain themselves. They give away their emotional freedom, waiting for a moment that may never happen. And even if that person comes back and gives you a reason, you have to ask yourself, will it truly be enough? Or will it just lead to more questions? Because explanations don't always heal. Sometimes they justify behavior that still hurts you. Sometimes they reveal reasons that have nothing to do with you at all. And sometimes they are incomplete or even dishonest. If your peace depends on someone else's words, then your peace is always going to be unstable. Real closure comes from within. It comes from your ability to look at the situation as it is not as you hoped it would be and make a decision about what it means for your life. It comes from accepting that you may never fully understand why someone did what they did and choosing to move forward anyway.
That's not weakness.
That's strength. It takes strength to let go of the need for answers. It takes strength to stop chasing explanations and start trusting your own interpretation of events. Because the truth is, you already have enough information. Their actions gave you everything you needed to see. The silence, the absence, the inconsistency, that was the message. Closure is not about getting all the details. It's about accepting the reality. And acceptance doesn't mean you agree with what happened. It doesn't mean you approve of it. It simply means you stop fighting against it. You stop trying to rewrite the past or force a different outcome. You acknowledge what was and you choose what comes next. This is where your power begins to return. Because as long as you're waiting for someone else to give you closure, you're still tied to them. Your emotions, your thoughts, your sense of peace there, all dependent on something outside of your control. But the moment you decide, I don't need anything from them to move forward, you break that dependency. You reclaim your time, your energy, your focus. And here's something most people don't realize. Closure is not a single moment.
It's a process.
It's something you reinforce through your actions. Every time you choose not to revisit the past, every time you resist the urge to seek answers, you are choosing to let go of the past and move forward. Every time you focus on your own growth instead of their absence, you are creating closure. It's built in the small decisions, the quiet moments, the internal shifts that no one else sees. Now, when that person eventually comes back, and sometimes they may bring explanations, apologies, or reasons for their silence. And in that moment, you might feel the pull to listen, to engage, to finally get the answers you once wanted. But if you've already created closure within yourself, those words no longer have the same power over you. You can listen without needing. You can hear them without depending on what they say to define your next step. Because you've already made your decision. You've already moved forward. That doesn't mean you become cold or unfeeling. It means you become grounded. You respond from clarity, not confusion. from strength, not longing. And that is the difference between waiting for closure and becoming it. You don't need someone else to complete your understanding of what happened. You don't need their version of the story to validate your experience. What you felt was real.
What you went through mattered.
And what they showed you through their actions is enough. Closure is the moment you stop asking, why did this happen to me? And start asking, what do I choose now? It's the moment you realize that your future is not defined by someone else's absence, but by your own decisions moving forward. And once you reach that point, you are no longer stuck in the past. You are no longer waiting for something that may never come. You are free. Free to move on. Free to grow. Free to create something better. Because in the end, closure was never about them. It was always about you. There comes a moment in every emotionally defining experience where everything becomes clear, not necessarily easy, not necessarily comfortable, but clear. And when an avoidant finally stands in front of you after a long silence, that moment arrives. This is not just another interaction. It's not just about reconnecting or revisiting what once was. This is a decision point, a moment where everything you've learned, everything you've felt, and everything you've become is brought into focus. And whether you realize it or not, this is your power moment. For so long, the dynamic may have felt one-sided. You may have been the one waiting, the one wondering, the one trying to make sense of their absence. There was a time when their silence held power over you, when it created doubt, confusion, maybe even insecurity. But time has shifted something. Distance has changed something. You are not standing in the same place emotionally as you once were. And that means the dynamic itself has changed. The power is no longer in their hands. It's in yours. But power is not just about having control, it's about how you use it. Because in this moment, you have options. You can fall back into old patterns, react from old emotions, and recreate the same cycle. Or you can pause, reflect, and respond from the person you've become. This is where most people get tested. Not when things are difficult, but when something familiar returns. Familiarity has a pull. It reminds you of what you felt, what you hoped for, what you once believed was possible. And if you're not grounded in your growth, that familiarity can pull you right back into the same dynamic that once hurt you. But this moment is not about the past. It's about the present version of you, the version that has learned, evolved, and seen things more clearly. And the question is simple, even if the answer isn't. Are you going to choose based on who you used to be or who you are now? Your power lies in that choice. Choosing yourself doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always mean cutting someone off or walking away immediately. Sometimes it simply means slowing things down. It means not giving instant access to your time, your energy, or your emotions. It means observing instead of reacting. It means allowing actions, not words, to guide your decisions. Because when someone returns after a long silence, what they say matters far less than what they do next. Words are easy. Promises are easy. But consistency, that's where truth lies. And your power comes from recognizing that you no longer need to rush into anything. You no longer need to prove your worth, earn their attention, or secure their presence. You already know your value. This is also the moment where you redefine what you are available for. Not based on emotion, not based on history, but based on alignment. Does this person, as they are right now, align with the standards you've built? Can they meet you with the same level of presence, respect, and consistency that you've learned to give yourself? And if the answer is uncertain, that's your signal to pause, not to proceed. Power is not in forcing a connection to work. It's in having the discipline to choose what works for you. It's in being willing to walk away from something that no longer aligns, even if part of you still cares. Because caring is not the same as compatibility. And emotional attachment is not the same as emotional safety. This moment is also about trust in yourself. Trust in your ability to handle whatever decision you make. Trust that you don't need to cling to something out of fear of losing it, because what is truly meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself. When you operate from that place, everything changes. You are no longer reacting out of fear, scarcity, or uncertainty. You are choosing from clarity, confidence, and self-respect. And here's the most important part. Whatever you decide in this moment sets the tone for your future. Not just with this person, but with yourself. It reinforces your standards. It strengthens your identity. It defines what you are available for moving forward. So don't rush it. Don't let emotions override awareness. Don't let history dictate your present. This is your moment to pause, to reflect, and to choose intentionally. Because at the end of the day, this was never just about them coming back. It was about you becoming someone who no longer needs them to. And when you reach that place, when your decisions are no longer driven by longing, but by clarity, you step into a different kind of power. A quiet, grounded, unshakable power that doesn't need validation, doesn't chase approval, and doesn't compromise on what it knows it deserves. That is your power moment. And what you do with it will define everything that comes next.